The narrative around the experimental 2017 fighting game ARMS would lead you to believe that it was a total failure and a stain on an otherwise unforgettable year for Nintendo. But the reality of the situation is that in a year which gave us Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, and Splatoon 2, ARMS actually didn't do that badly from a critical or commercial point of view. It was just vastly overshadowed by the Nintendo veterans it found itself sandwiched between, and consequently, discussion around the game from the wider Nintendo audience died off pretty quickly. As it turns out, ARMS didn't have legs. However, there's still a strong case to be made that a sequel could be in production as we speak. In this video, I'll take you through the rise, fall, and potential rebirth of the ARMS franchise, because I don't think Nintendo is quite done with Springman and all the others just yet. In 2017, ARMS looked like a major hit for Nintendo, selling over 1 million copies in its first month and receiving constant support with brand new updates and competitive events. Things were going strong for sure, but as casual players started whittling down and moving on to games like Splatoon and Mario, it became apparent that ARMS had one fatal flaw. At the beginning of each match, you're asked to choose which ARMS you want to use. Every character has 3 default selections, but you can unlock way more to mix and match throughout the course of the game. On paper, this is a great way to promote creativity and add strategic depth, but competitively, it was a nightmare. Tournament organizers either had to fully unlock everything in the game several times over, or just ban players from using anything other than their character's default options. And to no one's surprise, most of them just chose not to bother with it. And so, ARMS was never a common feature in fighting game competitions, absolutely gutting its longevity and cultural relevance. To add insult to injury, it's speculated that sales and general interest in the game slowed down much more than Nintendo was expecting in 2018. And as a result, they quietly canceled the ARMS comic book adaptation without even a formal announcement. In fact, the only reason why we know it's no longer in the works for sure is because the author of the book, Ian Flynn, described it as a canceled project in his online portfolio. All of this helped to paint the picture that ARMS fell off fast after the Switch got a few more exclusives under its belt. Nintendo had stopped talking about the game, its online servers were pretty barren, and there weren't many major events featuring the game outside of EVO in 2018. But all that would change in 2020, when ARMS managed to achieve one of the most prestigious honors a game can receive. Min Min was added to Smash. This was huge. Nintendo was talking about the game again, there was an online tournament for the first time in a long time, and the Smash promotion helped push another 350,000 units of ARMS off the shelves. And while that certainly isn't the biggest number in the world, ARMS was back in the conversation and managed to cap out at 2.73 million units sold. To put that into perspective, that's more than some of Nintendo's staple franchises like Metroid or Kirby can sell consistently. But here we are 6 years later, and still, that's the last we ever really heard of ARMS. But with the Switch 2 now entering into its second year, I firmly believe that despite the hurdles it faced in the late 2010s and its general irrelevance after 2020, ARMS 2 is going to release within the next couple of years. Something I didn't know before researching for this video is that ARMS was not developed by some random Nintendo-adjacent studio. No, Nintendo actually put their best developers on the project. To be specific, Entertainment Planning Development Group 9, or EPD9, was assigned to the job, otherwise known as the Mario Kart team. Now the thing about Mario Kart is that it's a once-in-a-generation kind of game, and the Switch 2 already has one. Meaning that while there is no doubt a part of EPD9 focused on updating and adding more content to Mario Kart World, I sincerely doubt that that's the whole team. In the past, we've seen them work on 2 projects at once, with most of the team developing Mario Kart World and a smaller section of the team focused on the Booster Course Pass. So now the question has to be asked. With upwards of 8 years in front of them, what will EPD9 develop next? Well, it's sure as hell not going to be Nintendogs, I'll tell you that. Furthermore, it's heavily rumored that Nintendo mandated an ARMS rep be added to Smash in the second Fighters Pass. Which character that was specifically was up to Sakurai, who ended up choosing Min Min at the request of ARMS director Kosuke Yabuki. But the point is that if Nintendo really wanted to leave ARMS behind as a one-off, then why would they ask Sakurai to give one of his coveted slots to a character from the game? Additionally, when the Switch 2 launched, a handful of games were given free updates. Among them were mostly franchises that you'd expect: Mario, Pokemon, Zelda, Splatoon, Donkey Kong, and ARMS? Hold on, one of these things is not like the others. Surely you can see where I'm going with this. Nintendo may have cancelled the comic book project, and they may have stopped sponsoring the competitive scene on their own, but the fact of the matter is that they're still showing interest in ARMS. And to be honest, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if the FGC had taken to ARMS just a little bit more. And on that, as we go into a potential ARMS 2, there are some critical lessons that Nintendo has to learn. A lot of people tend to put the heat on Nintendo for the mistakes that they made, which led to the decline in ARMS' popularity. And while it's all completely valid criticism, we also need to cut them a little bit of slack. It was their first fighting game after all. Pokken is handled by a mixture of different companies entirely, and Smash has always been considered internally as a party game, meaning that setting up something like a tournament mode probably wasn't even a thought in the company's minds until people started trying to organize. And to their credit, they did learn from that experience. In version 5.1, they added the tournament mode, allowing all ARMS to be unlocked from the start, with the only downside being that your fights won't net you in-game currency or progress towards badges. Pretty fair trade-off if you ask me. But the problem is that this was way too little, way too late. ARMS was already 8 months old, it had stopped receiving content updates, and it had lost what little relevance it had being the new kid on the block back in 2017. But the point I'm getting at is that this feature would no doubt be available at launch in the sequel, meaning it could be more appealing to the wider fighting game community. Another mistake Nintendo made when advertising ARMS is making it look like an advancement of Wii boxing. A lot of hardcore fighting game fans thought it looked like a gimmicky motion control game and wrote it off immediately as a result. Actually, there are still a large number of people to this day who are shocked to hear that you can play it on a regular controller. So while this may be an oddly specific suggestion, this time around, I think Nintendo should show off a clip of someone playing with a Pro Controller against a person who's using Joy-Cons. That way, they can easily communicate both control schemes without an in-depth explanation. And that might make fighting game fans just a little bit more interested, something that, as we previously established, is vital to this game's success. But we've spent a lot of time discussing competitive play. Surely Nintendo should also throw in a mode for casuals, right? I think the biggest missed opportunity in ARMS is the lack of a story mode. Grand Prix is sort of like one, but it functions a lot closer to classic mode than Subspace, if you catch my drift. A fun fact about me is that I am a massive comic book fan. Free Comic Book Day is treated like a major event in my family. My dad and I always both take off from work and go from store to store trying to collect as many free comics as we can. And this tradition actually started in 2018, which was also the year that a preview issue of the canceled ARMS comic was put out by Dark Horse. I'd never played the game at that point, but I read the book anyway, and proceeded to spend way too much time learning all I could about the lore of the ARMS universe. All of this is to say that the biggest casual appeal that ARMS has is in its characters and world building. You can find hints of a story buried in the game, but nothing really substantial. And so, I think that adding a story mode would create a whole new level of appeal for the game. One direction I thought they could go in is having the characters investigate the shady side of the ARMS lab. With the company clearly employing mad scientists and researching the ARMS gene kinda unethically in some cases, they'd make for the perfect villains. For the uninitiated, the ARMS lab makes these masks to help the characters who are naturally born with the ARMS ability get a handle on their powers. Maybe it could be revealed that they not only help the users get control over their bodies, but they can also be used to remotely control them to behave against their will. This could be like a World of Light situation, where Mechanica, the only playable character in the game who does not naturally have the ARMS ability, would have to rescue the others from their mind control and slowly gather up a team to take down Dr. Coyle. Of course, this is just a very rough elevator pitch, but the point is that there's a lot you can do in this world. Not to mention that adding in some newcomers to both the base game and future updates would keep the game in the conversation. I just hope they support it a little longer than 6 months this time. But what do you think? Will EPD9 really shift focus to ARMS 2? And if they do, what would you like to see in a sequel? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I want to give a very special shout out also to our patrons who are listed on screen right now. I really couldn't do it without you. And as always, please remember, believe to achieve.